You might not know this, but Airbus first had the idea of the A380 in 1988, a good 17 years before the first prototype rolled out of the Airbus factory. What happened in that little known period of history, and what other high-density aircraft concepts did Airbus even consider? Let's explore the evolution of the Airbus A380 design and how we got the plane that we know and love today. Welcome to Found and Explained. Well, technically not an aviation channel. If you like planes, airlines and more, then subscribe. Designing the aircraft of the future in the 80s wouldn't be easy. Engineers knew that passenger air traffic was growing at 5% a year and set to double by the year 2000 and triple by 2025. Thus, the plane of the future would favor capacity over speed and be designed to solve the problem of overcapacity airports simultaneously. Airbus, who had recently launched the Airbus A340 program in June 1987,
4 engines for long haul,
needed to bring a bigger plane to the market that complemented the existing line of Airbus aircraft and competed against the Boeing 747 market dominance that Boeing had enjoyed for so long, and only recently launched the Dash 400 series of the plane.
If you have ever dreamed of being your own general and sending planes like this into battle, then you're in luck because it's Warpath's 4th anniversary celebration. Warpath is a real-time strategy game where you control everything from tanks to snipers to cutting-edge Black Ops aircraft on PC and mobile. There's no pay to win, just pure military strategy against opponents from around the world. So join today to take part of the celebration and get exclusive skins and massive gold prizes, and there's even a space station up for grabs on day 7. So check out the link down below, and come and play Warpath with me.
Not only that, around the same time, Lockheed was working on a very large subsonic transport and McDonnell Douglas its own MD-12, both programs that ran into issues and had their own respective flaws, something that the team at Airbus was keen to avoid. We have 2 videos on both of these planes that you can watch after this video. The program would be called the Airbus UHCA, or the Ultra High Capacity Airliner, and would be a secret project even from the Airbus CEO. The small team building the proposal worked in the shadows to avoid competition from discovering their plans and to avoid the media fallout from risking the very project itself. On October 1988, the head of the small group of designers, Jean Roder, reached out to the leadership team for a lunch meeting and presented them the model of what would become the Airbus A380. Remarking later the CEO's reaction, he was clearly surprised. He did not expect anything that big. Going big and bold won the CEO's trust, and the green light was given for further development. The team set to work and drew up a list of requirements to get this plane to the market. First, the plane would need to carry at least 500 passengers to fit above the passenger specifications of the Airbus A340 and prevent any cannibalization of Airbus sales. Second, the plane needed to be better and more fuel efficient than the current reigning large aircraft champ, the Boeing 747-400. Airbus was targeting a number of around 15% more fuel efficient. Lastly, this plane needed to be built with then modern technology, production lines and existing Airbus components. If it was cheap, then that would also be a bonus. With so much at stake, Airbus decided to go into a radical new direction and invite its 4 partner firms to each come up with a separate UHCA design. The 4 teams would be, and forgive me for mispronunciations, Aerospatiale, Deutsche Aerospace, also known as DASA, British Aerospace, and Construcciones Aeronautics, also known as CASA, and they would only have until 1992 to come up with the Airbus future aircraft. Airbus themselves didn't actually believe that one of the teams would put together a completed concept, but rather that they could pick and choose features from each to build the aircraft, thus lowering the risk that they would not be successful within the timeline. The most important part of these designs was the cross-section. The first design came from Jean Rodin himself at Airbus. Called the horizontal double bubble, it used existing Airbus A340 fuselages married into a double bubble design side by side. This cross-section would mean that the aircraft could seat 12 passengers across in a 2-2-2 space 2-2-2 configuration with a wall down the middle. This design would be cheaper and feature A340 wings, tails and other systems that were already used. The design got as far as the wind tunnel before being deemed too inefficient. Next up was a circular cross-section that was a giant circle that had a perfect pi diameter. While it was perfectly aerodynamic and structurally efficient to pressurize, it actually had issues with the upper deck space with curved ceilings and not enough room in the cargo hold. The opposite design to the circular one was the cloverleaf. It had plenty of space on board and even allowed gigantic amounts of cargo. To build it, the team proposed either a new large circular design or attaching an Airbus A320 airframe on top of an Airbus A340 fuselage. But where it had excellent cargo capacity, it didn't pass wind tunnel tests. There were other problems too. The A380 Vice President for Engineering later said, "If you have a narrow body mated on top of a wide body, then it is too restrictive. There is not enough room for growth, and the evacuation rules make it uneconomical." The fourth concept was proposed by DASA, called the A2000, that was bigger than the Airbus A380 today. It would seat 615 passengers on 3 decks, with the first-class passengers having cabins on the bottom level. A true triple-decker aircraft, which you can actually check out here in this video that we've already done. The last design was called the ovoid, and it put together the circular and the cloverleaf designs and the key learnings of the A2000 from DASA. Ideally, it was the perfect combination of all the designs, sans the double bubble, and would represent the aircraft's cross-section going forward. But the year of 1992 would be a rough one for the aviation industry. The failure of the MD-12 to realize the double-decker market dream and emerging issues at the MD Long Beach factory itself caused Airbus to slow down development and be far more cautious. After all, this program was estimated to cost a staggering €6 billion, which was not to be taken lightly. Airbus would work closely with its 10 selected airlines who had each different criteria, such as Lufthansa, who wanted one for European travel, Qantas, who needed a plane to cross the Pacific, and Singapore for its Singapore to London route. The design team would propose 2 different UHCA aircraft. The first and smaller design would be 600 to 800 seats, with the upper range 800 all-economy seater design for the Japanese market to rival the success that Boeing had had there with the Boeing 747SR. The latter 800 to 1050 design was proposed with a gigantic wing 63% bigger than the current Airbus A340 and would be 260 feet long. At this point, it would be a disservice to not mention the brief but stunning partnership between rivals Boeing and Airbus's partner firm DASA in 1993 to 1995. But it's such a fascinating tale that it needs its own future video. All that you need to know now is that the result of this cross-pollination is the UHCA program was delayed, and Airbus used the time to rejig the design and put together a near-final concept called the A3XX. Airbus would integrate the design teams at this point and combine the 3 concepts into one, and by 1995 the A3XX was starting to look a lot more like the current A380 that we have today. Airbus couldn't actually build the plane in its current format as a loose structure of independent European companies. They would have to actually restructure into a single entity to balance out costs and to bring this gigantic airframe to the market. During this restructuring, Airbus would put the final touches together on the A3XX, such as adding in 10 abreast seating to the plane to have a 3-4-3 configuration, and to avoid, and I quote, the American prisoner middle seat, found on American planes that had a 2-5-2 seating configuration. Confident and closer to launching the program, Airbus started to shop around the three derivatives that it had of the A3XX. They were the A3XX-100, the -100R, and the A3XX-200. The first would carry 555 passengers in 3 classes to 7,500 nautical miles. The -900 would be flying the same passengers 8,500 nautical miles, and the -200 would trade range for capacity with 656 seats. The final choice of the cross-section then drove many other aspects of the configuration. Relatively speaking, the fuselage is, for example, quite short compared with the dimensions of the wing. This would mean that the wing would be designed for bigger stretches of the A380 in the future, which we have again done a full video on the channel. Around this time, Airbus also worked on the various challenges that such a large plane would incur, such as what engines would be used to power the aircraft, as well as how to navigate such a large plane around airports and taxiways, with even folding wings like the 777X considered. Plus, at one point Airbus even tested removing the vertical stabilizer on the tail and using canard wings on the upper deck instead. What an interesting design choice that could have been, but alas, it would have been too unpractical and get in the way of jet bridges. Lufthansa, who had been an airliner partner consultant during this time, asked Airbus for a shortened version of the A3XX, dubbed the A3XX-50, that would carry only 480 passengers to a range of 7,500 nautical miles, using existing engines like those on the then new Boeing 777. At the same time, Airbus would also add in the -100E, or later known as the A380F, cargo version at FedEx's request. Finally, after millions of dollars and years of work, the design was frozen in 1998 and Airbus was ready to launch the new A3XX at the Singapore Air Show. But seemingly right on cue, the Asian market was struck by a financial crisis. Airbus then said because of this that they would delay launching the program until airlines were ready to order. However, this is actually not the real reason. Airbus was struggling with achieving the second criteria that was outlined at the start of this video, that the A3XX had to achieve at least 15 to 20% of the fuel efficiency over the 747-400. To try and reach this, Airbus delayed the program again by another 9 months and pushed the wing size from 8,400 square feet to 8,800 square feet, adding small winglets like those used on the A320, and also changed the composite materials used in the construction, making it more expensive but also better fuel efficient for airlines. With this goal finally achieved, it was time to actually try and sell the plane before the launch. The plan was to try and secure a wide range of orders of only a few aircraft, but with as many legacy carriers as possible in each of the airline alliances, Oneworld, SkyTeam and Star Alliance. They reasoned that 1 or 2 airlines that had picked up 3 or 4 aircraft, the others in the alliance would actually go on to order the plane as well. Airbus was focusing on airlines like British Airways, Air France, Singapore and Qantas, but it was a surprise that the new Middle Eastern carrier called Emirates was actually the first to jump on enthusiastically the A3XX bandwagon. Air France soon followed with its own interest in 10 aircraft, likely because the A3XX program would have final assembly in Toulouse, home ground for the airline. On the 19th of December 2000, the A380 was officially launched with a name chosen for 2 reasons. With an 8 selected to represent the double-decked fuselage cross-section, and 8 being a lucky number in some Asian countries. The numbers A350 had been used during the design process, and A360 had also been considered, as well as the A370 being rejected because the number 7 being associated with another very large aircraft on the market. The development cost of the A380 had grown to 11 to 14 billion euros when the first aircraft prototype was finally completed, from the humble 4 to 6 billion euros that was considered at the start of the program. Airbus would convert its preliminary designs into launch versions, with the A3XX-100 becoming the A380-800 and the A3XX-50 becoming the small A380-700. Then the A3XX-200, the larger version, would be the proposed -900 version, and the freighter version giving the F designation. Remarking at the launch, Manfred Bischoff, the then chairman at Airbus, said that Airbus has a new flagship. This is a major breakthrough for Airbus as a full-range competitor on world markets. We are convinced that this aircraft will have a bright and extremely successful future. Today, in the year 2021, we can look back and see that the A380 was designed for the market of 1988, where the world was optimistic about its growth and it seemed that the hub-to-spoke travel would grow forever. Alas, Airbus with all of its might couldn't stop the train in time and switch tracks, like Boeing to the new point-to-point model, and the A380 was built simply too late for the world. Thanks so much for watching my little video today. If you enjoyed this little extra video, then I suggest that you subscribe down below. It's free and you can unsubscribe at any time. And consider leaving me a like and a comment, because that will really help with the algorithm. And if you want to support the channel more, then we have a fantastic Patreon where you can check out where we post videos early and ad-free where possible, and you can chat to others and you can feel all warm and fuzzy because you're supporting me and the channel. So thank you again so much for watching today's video, and I can't wait to see you on the next one. Airbus always intended the double-decker Super Jumbo A380 to be a flexible platform much like its smaller aircraft, the Airbus A320. However, that future would never come to pass, and the only aircraft built would be the Airbus A380-800. What were the other types of A380s planned, and why were they never made? Let's find out. Back in the 90s, Airbus was looking for a new aircraft design for a market of hub-to-hub travel. They saw that millions of passengers needed to fly between continents, and that major hub airports like New York and Heathrow couldn't land more planes per day. So why not go bigger? The A380 was created to fill this market. Its original proposed configuration was 555 passengers in a 3-class layout, or if the airline so choose, it could also carry 853 passengers in a single-class economy configuration. The design range for the Airbus A380 is 8,000 nautical miles, capable of flying from Hong Kong to New York or from Sydney to Istanbul non-stop. But this passenger A380 wasn't the only one that was pitched to airlines at the launch of this product. Airbus also pitched a cargo version of the plane. The Airbus A380 freighter would have had the most extensive internal space of any flying cargo aircraft, even more than the Boeing 747-8F, and only outmatched by the single Antonov AN-225 Miria in service. The A380F would be capable of transporting a 150-ton maximum payload over 5,600 nautical miles. But there was a flaw with the A380F design. Because the aircraft had a higher empty weight than the Boeing 747 freighter, as in without cargo it was heavier on its own, it could not carry as much. Cargo operators would have run out of engine lifting power before they ran out of space on board. And that second level structure wasn't really designed for heavy materials, nor did cargo operators have any way to reach the upper level with current ground vehicles. Ultimately, delays to the A380 passenger program pushed back the A380 freighter, and the 27 orders for the freighter with Emirates, FedEx, ILFC and UPS were cancelled. Airbus would not give up on the concept and would patent a combi version of the A380 in 2015. This version would offer the flexibility of carrying both passengers and cargo, along with being rapidly reconfigurable to expand or contract the cargo area and passenger area as needed for a given flight. There was also a proposed private version of the A380 that was in pre-production and would have been totally out of this world. It featured a spiral staircase wrapping around a glass lift to reach all 3 levels, and that also went outside the plane when on the tarmac. It had a garage for 2 luxury cars, a Turkish bath lined with marble, 20 VIP suites, 5 master cabins with bathrooms attached, and a concert hall. The plane would have been able to transport 50 VIP passengers to a range of 9,400 nautical miles. With a price tag of £3,000, it actually did have one order in 2007, but for unknown reasons, the plane was shifted to the commercial program and given a passenger fit-out instead. The private A380 may have even been considered as an alternative for Air Force One, which you can check out more history about in my Air Force One video here. With the A380, you might have noticed that the wing seems a little bigger than necessary. This is because the wing of the A380 was designed in mind for a future bigger version of the airframe, an Airbus A380-900. Compared to the Airbus A380-800, the -900 would have had a seating capacity for 650 passengers in a standard 3-class configuration, or approximately 900 passengers in an economy-only configuration. Airlines interested in this aircraft included Emirates, Virgin Atlantic, Cathay Pacific, Air France, KLM, and Lufthansa. There were also rumours that Airbus wanted to go bigger and was considering a project called the Airbus A380 Stretch, or now known as the A380-1000. And the -1000 is an impressive number because that's just as how many passengers this aircraft would have carried in its full capacity in an all-economy configuration. Such a huge aircraft would have had trouble finding a market, but likely would have flown London to New York and used for pilgrimage flights from Malaysia. When these orders were less than forthcoming and airlines started to raise questions about the operating cost of the A380, Airbus decided to present a new engine option of the A380 called the A380neo. Much like the A320neo and the A330neo, this plane would have had improvements across the board with new engines and better fuel efficiency. For an airline like Emirates, who operated an entire fleet of Airbus A380 aircraft, these upgrades would have been welcome and had a significant impact on its bottom line. In 2017, Airbus CEO Fabrice Briga confirmed that Airbus would not launch an A380neo, stating, "There is no business case to do that. This is absolutely clear." Lack of sales of the A380 and the belief that the market was going in a different direction, point to point, pushed airlines to other aircraft like the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350. The last version of the A380 proposed by Airbus was the A380 Plus, presented to the world at the 2017 Paris Air Show. The A380 Plus would offer 13% lower costs per seat with a special split scimitar winglet and offer airlines an option of either 50 more seats or 200 more nautical miles. Its maintenance cycle would have been stretched to allow 6 more days of operation per year, and improvements from the A350 program would have been brought in to reduce weight. Like with the Airbus A380neo, there was simply no more desire to buy more A380s, and the entire program was eventually discontinued. At the end of the day, the A380 never truly realized its dream. Had it been released in the 80s or 90s, perhaps it would hold a place in our skies like the Boeing 747, but today the plane is being scrapped and even a second-hand market doesn't exist.
with plans of what could have been with the A380 line only existing on paper. Which aircraft is your favourite in the list? Let me know down in the comments. And now a quick little message from me to you. I've been making these videos for a few months now, and I have been totally overwhelmed by the positive support from you all. But I want to make better videos and keep pushing the quality of this channel. And that's why I've decided to create a Patreon for the channel. So basically, Patreon's a platform where people can join and get several different perks as part of their support of the channel. And the perks that I'll be offering are suggestions and voting on the next topics for Found and Explained, exclusive live streams and tutorials on how I make my videos, access to the Found and Explained Discord server that I'll be soon creating, early videos when possible, completely ad-free, and I'll chuck that all in a link in the description and you wonderful people can go have a look in your own time. So thank you again so much for watching.
Airbus has made a name for itself with its fantastic range of passenger planes to suit all situations, from the lumbering Airbus A380 to the incredible Canadian-built Airbus A220. But there is one giant Airbus aircraft that has yet to make the leap to passenger service, and I think is possibly one of the most interesting Airbus aircraft flying today. And of course, I'm talking all about the Airbus A400M Atlas, the military transport juggernaut that can carry tanks, cross oceans, and land anywhere. And with a tagline like that, why wouldn't airlines be interested? But that only raises interesting questions, like just how many passengers could it carry and where would it fly? Today we'll be turning this plane into a passenger aircraft worthy of the likes of Emirates or the reputation of Frontier, but I assure you it won't be an easy task. So spin those propellers and open your Atlas to strap in as we create yet another monstrosity on your favorite aviation channel. The Airbus A400M was initially created to fill a very unique military need. It was designed to serve as a tactical airlifter with strategic capabilities, intending to replace aging transport aircraft like the Transall C-160 and the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. It's positioned perfectly between the C-130 and the Boeing C-17 Glowmaster in terms of its size. But the A400M also boasts the capacity to carry heavier loads than the C-130 and is also capable of utilizing rough landing strips, effectively landing anywhere. In addition to its primary transport function, the A400M is also equipped for aerial refueling and medical evacuation when outfitted with the appropriate gear. So pretty much the jack of all trades and the perfect testbed for our nefarious low-cost carrier plans. So let's see what we're working with, shall we? The aircraft has a length of 45.1 meters and a wingspan of 42.4 meters, which actually makes it rather boxy. Fortunately, we don't need to infer just how much that actually is in usable cargo space, as we have those exact dimensions. The cargo compartment has a width of 4 meters and a height of 3.85, with a total length of 17.71 meters. But it's that length that doesn't include the actual ramp area that is also unusable. That's around another 5.4 meters. It can also carry 37,000 kilograms, which should be plenty as the average American weighs around 85 kilos. Oh yes, I know most of you are watching from the United States, but my poor Australian colonial mind thinks in metric, so forgive me if I figure out the maths in meters and kilograms. I'll put it on screen where I can, the imperial measurements, or where the editor remembers. Now, Airbus claims that the turboprop can carry around 116 fully equipped troops with their gear and 4 crew members, but let's see what we can do. The average airline seat has 30 inches of pitch depth, which is around 0.762 meters. and it's 18 inches wide, which is 0.45 meters. If the cabin is 4 meters wide, that's 8.8 seats, but we also need an aisle or two in the middle, so I think we'll just fit 8 seats in a 2-4-2 configuration, which in my opinion is the best configuration you can get, as 2 people can sit by themselves. Next up is how many rows of these seats we can fit on board. With 17.71 meters of cabin space, and at 0.762 per row gives us 23.24 rows. Now likely we need some extra room for toilets and a galley, so we'll say 22 rows in total. 22 rows at 8 seats per row is 176 passengers. But wait, did you notice that the cargo cabin is actually much taller than a regular aircraft? Yes, at 3.85 meters, we could potentially fit in a whole another deck if the area wasn't used for cargo like on a normal passenger plane. If we fitted in another level, and ignoring the extra width that we would have, it would be another 176 passengers, bringing the total on board to 350 passengers. Yeah, take that Bombardier Q400 that can only take 90. But I also love the boarding for this plane. With the ramp at the back of the aircraft, the passengers could just quickly get on and off, making turnarounds lightning fast. Now that our monster aircraft is ready to go, where exactly would we fly it? This is where it gets interesting. The key advantage of this plane, and why it was built, is its ability to land everywhere. Now, most passenger planes, and I mean 99% of them, fly exclusively to airports in major cities that have tarmac runways. But this plane could open up routes to places that don't even have airports, let alone a landing strip. Aircraft is a major continent that has plenty of people that are willing to fly, but hundreds of miles from the nearest airport. This plane could land at many remote locations and landing strips, desolate areas, delivering cargo, expertise, and help this developing continent reach its isolated regions. Naturally, this would have to be at a government cost, but before you say that nobody would pay for this, keep in mind that many regional routes in even the first world are actually operated as a service by the government rather than for-profit commercial routes. There are likely cities around the world that are hard to reach and lack the capacity, and a plane like this could alleviate the problem and link them up. But that's not all. The plane has an impressive range, and it would be perfect for the islands in the South Pacific or long routes across archipelagos like Indonesia and the Philippines, that both have vast populations that need to travel. It looks like that the future is bright for the latest and greatest Airbus plane, but let's kind of bring this fantasy back down to earth, like a touch and go on a pilot's first solo. So just how realistic is this? Well, at first you're going to think I'm totally insane, and I do question how you would be surprised considering what channel you're on. But let me tell you, the plans for the Atlas make a little bit more sense when you think about how many there are. With 174 ordered and 119 built so far, there are actually going to be a slew of these aircraft lying around to be snapped up once they've finished their military service life. These machines are expensive, and getting them in this way would be far cheaper than building them from scratch. They also have the same or similar controls as the Airbus A380, so it is feasible that airlines that already have the A380 could type rate their pilots easily across, especially once the Airbus A380 is retired and those pilots are standing around looking at what comes next. Hey, if Boeing can do it, so can Airbus.
And to better answer this question, I've come all the way to Dubai to see the Airbus A400M in person, and let's see if it actually can be a commercial passenger aircraft. Really dumb question here, now that we're on the Airbus A400M. Yeah. Do you think this could ever be configured to be more of a commercial transport during maybe the end of its lifetime? There is a commercial version. Yeah? Yeah? And how many can you fit in where?
That will reduce the capacity to about
80 something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you will have an end part, and then in the middle the standard seats, like you know it from an airline are everywhere. Yeah.
And just to exemplify even stupidly, do you think you could ever put a second deck into here and put seats?
Not. Because if you see this part in front of the aircraft, it's closed.
Okay.
You cannot get into the second row.
Okay.
There's no door on the upper side of the aircraft that you cannot get.
Of course.
Listen.
Okay, perfect. Well, there you have it. That's the answer there.
But let's be real about everything else before you start writing in the comments. The use case, I honestly was grasping at straws. Sure, this plane can land anywhere, but any population center that is big enough to need a 350 passenger aircraft come regularly can build a damn runway. It's a lot cheaper to just pour some concrete than converting a military plane over to passenger use. Plus, there's also the question of military technology being handed over to, say, civil operators, who then might fly that plane over to other nations who would be very interested to have a sticky beak at the latest and greatest Airbus military aircraft. That's one of the reasons why we may never see a B-2 or a stealth aircraft turned into a private jet, which is actually a pretty fantastic idea and something I think maybe we'll see in the next Found and Explained video. So let me know down in the comments if you want to see that as well.
When Airbus first originally launched the Airbus A350 concept to the market, there were actually 3 different versions, with the third being a smaller version called the A350-800. It had 182 orders and looked like it would become the must-have new aircraft for airlines across the world. But then, Airbus never built the aircraft and would go on to instead replace it with the A330neo program instead. In today's video, we'll answer what was the Airbus A350-800, why was it cancelled, and why in retrospect, maybe Airbus should have built it after all. Just a quick hello from me, Nick, to say subscribe if you like this type of content. Back in the early 2000s, Airbus was in a tough spot. Boeing had jumped the gate with a new clean sheet design called the Boeing 787 Dreamliner that was gaining significant interest, despite Airbus saying it was a mere reaction to the popular A330 program. But on the urging of airlines, the airframe maker needed to design a swift new aircraft, one that matched the incredible technology of the 787 Dreamliner and replaced the Airbus A330 and A340 series. This A350 series was originally designed as an improvement on the A330 platform and would be called the A330-200 Lite, with a new wing, tail, cockpit, and new engines, but keep the same cross-section as the A330. This led many airlines to publicly and openly criticize Airbus, saying that it was a band-aid reaction to the Boeing 787, and that having gone to the effort of so many modifications, Airbus should just totally redesign the aircraft anyway into a clean sheet concept. And they did just that. When Airbus originally launched the A350 platform back on the 1st of December in 2006, there were 3 different versions. The Airbus A350-900 would be created first, and be stretched to form that series for a longer range and more passengers, and a -800 shrink for those who wanted range but carry less passengers. Airbus would start developing the original A350, the -900 first, before moving on to the other models, as this was an effectively cheaper way to design an aircraft. So what exactly was the A350-800? The aircraft would have had a length of 60.45 meters and seat 276 passengers in a typical 3-class configuration with a range of 8,245 nautical miles and carry around 259 tons. Airbus also felt confident that it would increase its range by a further 250 nautical miles, which is around about 460 kilometers, but this would have actually pushed its fuel burn well above the 787. Specifically, the -800 would have been the spiritual successor to the Airbus A330-200 series, much like how the bigger versions of the A350 succeeded the A340. It would be used for airlines looking to operate transatlantic services or to fill in the upper market gap of around 270 passengers with a new modern aircraft, something that the Boeing 767 had enjoyed for so long. But not all of the aircraft in this series would see the light of day. and namely, the Dash 800 would be cancelled only a few years later. The main reason wasn't that it wasn't popular. After all, it did actually have 182 orders, but rather because it wasn't inherently advantageous over the A350-900. The range between the two was minimal, with the Dash 900 having a range of only 145 nautical miles lower than the Dash 800, and then the Dash 800 would end up carrying less passengers than the Dash 900. So for those that had ordered the Dash 800, it was starting to look a lot less smart to simply not upgrade to the bigger Dash 900, which had relatively the same economics, but would make more money. Thus, from mid-2008, more and more customer orders for the Dash 800 slipped into upgrades for the bigger Dash 900 model. As production of the prototype bore on, Airbus realized the startling truth. There wasn't much need for the Dash 800 at all. Thus, at the 2014 Farnborough Air Show, Airbus sealed the fate of the A350-800 by revamping the A330 with a new engine option.
And now the launch of a new baby for our successful widebody family.
Essentially, that the A330-200 Lite that they had discussed nearly a decade ago. Airbus would then encourage airlines with Dash 800 orders to either upgrade or switch over to the new Neo range, a range that was cheaper and effectively better in the market segment than the Dash 800. I believe that all of our customers will either convert to the A350-900 or the A330 Neo. The A330 Neo is the more efficient solution compared to the Dash 800. After the bulk of the airlines had switched away from the Dash 800, Airbus would go on to cancel the program and not look back. But perhaps Airbus would have been better served in a competitive sense to continue to make the Dash 800 way back then. Let me explain. You see, there is a small market gap in the Boeing lineup, right between the Boeing 737 and the Boeing 787 of around 200 to 250 seats. Boeing doesn't have an aircraft that efficiently fills this space, and this is now known as the middle of the market. On the lower side, they have the Boeing 737 going up to around 200 seats, and the 787-8 sits at the top at around 240 seats. Conversely, Airbus brings to the table in this space the A330 series and the A330neo-800, an aircraft remarkably known for its poor sales. So far, only 15 have been ordered compared to 316 of the bigger Dash 900 Neo. What I'm getting at here is that there is a market demand gap for both builders. This is because there are so many aircraft existing on the market that fill it, such as the Boeing 757, Boeing 767, and the Airbus A330 series. Airlines don't really need any new aircraft right now, but these aircraft are either old designs or not made anymore, leaving the path wide open for a new aircraft to enter the market, namely the Boeing 797. If Boeing was to develop a 797 aircraft, it would be a clean sheet design that would fill in the 220 to 250 market, and thanks to new technology, would effectively be superior to the aging platform of the A330neo. Had Airbus developed an A350-800 shrink, it is possible that they could have filled in this market from the top, and the new A321XLR filling in the market demand from the bottom, closing off the market to Boeing for decades to come. But alas, choosing to make the Dash 800 a shrink of the Dash 900 instead of its own design ended up making it too expensive to operate and effectively killing the program, leaving the goal wide open for Boeing to build the 797. As for Airbus, you wonder why they didn't instead focus on building a stretch version of the A350-1000 to compete with the new Boeing 777-9. But perhaps that's exactly what they're working on, and we will see it with the new A350neo, a video that I invite you to check out right here. Thanks so much for watching the quick video today about the A350-800 that was never built. It's a cool concept of a plane, but it didn't actually make sense to build it at the time. And speaking of things that make sense, we highly suggest that you subscribe if you like this content. And if you want to support the channel, then we have a great Patreon right here. You can find the link down in the description. Thanks so much for watching.
This is the Airbus A322. Carrying over 250 passengers to a range of 5,000 nautical miles, this future stretch of the A321 could be an absolute game changer for the aviation industry. But this plane of the future might never be built by Airbus, leaving the goal wide open for Boeing to sweep in and reclaim its short-haul title. What is this plane? Why is it so revolutionary? And why is Airbus choosing not to build it? Let's find out. Airbus has been very clever with its A320 range, delivering several different derivatives to meet varying market demand. These versions are bigger or smaller, with different passenger capabilities and ranges depending on their customer airline's use case. For example, they created the smallest version of the A320, the A318, for regional routes in Europe, and then up to the fantastic A321 XLR stretch for long-range single-aisle routes. But questions are raised when you look at their portfolio in detail. As there have been 2 shrinks of the flexible A320 frame so far, and only 1 stretch, why can't there be a second stretch beyond the A321? This hypothetical new version, which we have called the A322 or the A321++, would be lengthened by 4 meters and would allow up to 24 more passengers than the original A321. If airlines wanted it, the plane could carry 260 passengers in a strict high-density configuration, or a very flexible 220 passengers with 2 classes, including lie-flat business class seats. We have already seen JetBlue put such a concept in their A321 narrowbody for flights across the Atlantic, and I can't imagine that they and others wouldn't snap up this hypothetical A322. Here's why it would be so popular. As the plane would be heavier but without the extra power, with an MTOW of only 101 tons, its range would be limited initially to only 3,500 nautical miles, 1,000 nautical miles shorter than the long-range XLR. This, however, would make it operate perfectly fine for most airline use cases, such as Los Angeles to New York, Sydney to Melbourne, London to New York, Dubai to Mumbai, and many more. This would make the aircraft perfect for that middle-of-the-market gap between narrow-body aircraft and wide-body planes, with advantages of both. But this range could be further improved with better engine technology and better wings, a 5 to 7% better engine than the A321 Neo engines, and a bit higher thrust of 35 to 37,000 pounds would allow it to push aggressively into this longer range market. Pratt & Whitney have proposed a 35,000 PW1135G engine, but the timing is still unknown when that will actually reach the market. Airbus has also been working on new wings for this design, like the one for the A350, but for the entire A320 series. But again, the timelines for this market entry are unknown. The deal gets better for airlines with the A322. If the plane was built on the same production lines as the A320 series, costs would be reduced to around 50% of a twin-aisle counterpart, like the slower to sell and, might I add, older A330 series. This makes it a no-brainer for airlines looking for bigger capacity aircraft, but who don't want to commit to the wide-body design, or perhaps can't afford to with their networks. Like Aegean in Greece, who operates mainly to smaller island airports that can't take wide-body aircraft.
We should also mention that the secondary market for narrowbody aircraft like the A321neo are hot right now and are far more lucrative than the widebody market. You can check this out on a slightly out of date on how much aircraft costs right here on the channel. Lastly, this plane could be built within the next 5 years, beating rival Boeing's proposed new clean sheet design, the Boeing 797, to the market and securing the European plane maker's empire for the next few decades to come. The Airbus A322neo should be the perfect replacement for the stretched Boeing 757-300, even though it is not as popular as the -200 back in the old days. If it were to happen, we could imagine that Delta and United would probably be the first two customers with priorities to order this A322 to replace its aging Boeing 757-300 fleet before any other airlines want to order them. It would also be a stopgap for airlines operating the 767 who haven't yet committed to bigger aircraft like the 787 or the A330 series. But then again, perhaps Airbus won't build this plane at all, and after this break, I'll tell you exactly why. According to some, and this is entering rumor territory here, Airbus was about to build this A322 when it was also pitching the XLR, two versions of the A321neo. However, remember those engines and the new carbon fiber wing that would need to be built to reach that 5,000 nautical mile distance? They don't exist yet, and therefore the plane would be too limited in range for customers. With the XLR version also entering the market at the same time and these new technologies too unknown, Airbus realized that their so-called game-changer A322 wouldn't beat any competition, and it would also cannibalize sales from the XLR itself. Plus, we have to keep in mind that Airbus doesn't actually want to step on Boeing's toes at this point. The A320 series is currently more popular than the 737, and it is more breathing room for future updates to design. Unlike the 737, which we can agree, thanks to the MAX, has reached its hopeful final iteration. But this gets deeper, so it's time to put on your tinfoil hats. Follow me on the logic here. If Airbus were to build the A322 and completely cut Boeing out of the short-haul market, there is really nothing stopping Boeing from dropping everything to build its new 797 as soon as possible, putting Airbus on the back foot and scrambling to come up with a new short-haul idea. Perhaps in a more sinister way, Airbus is waiting for Boeing to design the 797 or the 757 replacement aircraft, and then it would simply release the A322 at a lower cost and quicker to the market. Without the 797 existing at the moment, or even remotely ready to come to the market, Airbus has nothing to gain by building the A322. There are also some other issues with the A322 design, such as a lack of toilets or enough galley space, let alone flight attendants, once you start to get up to these bigger passenger numbers. This would all need to be worked out before the aircraft could be certified. Plus, having a new wing isn't such an easy upgrade to this one plane, and would likely require the entire family line of A320s to be redesigned. This includes new wheels, new engines, and new landing gears. And if you're going to redesign the entire line, at that point, isn't it a new aircraft series entirely? At the end of the day, we know that Boeing has this plane design in its back pocket, but we don't know for sure why it hasn't built it already. But we do know that when Boeing finally decides to bring a new short-haul aircraft to the market, Airbus will be ready to pounce with the A322. Thanks so much for watching today's video on the A322. It's a very interesting topic and something that should be discussed and has been discussed for years. Airbus is a very large company and is always considering new concepts for the market. The A322 is no exception, and likely if Airbus were to make a new short airplane, then the A322 concept will evolve in that direction. And I do apologize if the sound today is a little bit strange. Upstairs they're currently completely renovating and it sounds terrible. So thanks for your patience with putting up with some slight audio issues and enjoying this new video. So let me know down in the comments what you think of today's video, and if you'd like to support the channel, I also have a link to a Patreon where you can come on and see videos early, and also a link to our Discord where you can come and chat to me and discuss things, all things aviation. Thank you so much for watching. How much does it cost an airline to operate an aircraft? Do they make a lot of money, or do they make nothing at all? In this video, I will break down several different flights, why the long-haul low-cost model doesn't work, and why EasyJet will never operate an Airbus A380. Hey, it's Nick here from the channel that you're watching. Stick around to the end of this video for a bonus Q&A where I'll be going over the top questions. The aviation industry has one of the stranger balance sheets to explore. Unlike other industries, airlines can be incredibly flexible with their costs, and sometimes things don't really cost much at all. For example, an aircraft themselves are generally leased by airlines, not owned. Even brand new aircraft that are bought by an airline from, say, Boeing or Airbus are then passed onto a leasing firm in what is known as a lease buyback. This means that airlines can have the advantage of buying a new aircraft without actually paying for it outright. Thus, most aircraft are leased, and I've made 2 great videos that explain in too much detail how much they are. But generally, you can expect to get an aircraft for thousands a month. On the opposite side of the spectrum is fuel. Airlines need fuel to operate, and you can't fly without something in the tank, and this is a cost that fluctuates daily and changes the bottom line significantly. That's why we see so many airlines investing in green fuels and other cost-saving measures to keep this as low as possible. So on to the main event. How much do airlines actually make? According to a report back in 2018, the average profit per customer of a typical New York to Los Angeles flight was around $20 despite the fact that the ticket was $323 on average. This sounds pretty outrageous, doesn't it? Here's a quick price breakdown of where your money goes for this ticket. Of the $323 earned per passenger, $34 is in taxes by various different authorities, $88 is for crew involved with the operating and running the flight. This isn't just the flight attendant asking you to put your tray table down, but also includes the pilot, maintenance crews, admin, those in the head office, and anyone involved in the company. Then we need to consider fuel. For this particular route back in 2018, and with the fuel price back then, this was $55 for the trip. Now you can see why an airline wants to ensure that their plane is as fuel efficient as possible, as the fuel cost is more than double the profit per passenger. Now it's time to pay for the plane itself. If a $100 million plane lasts around 25 to 30 years, then it will cost around $4 million per year for the airline. This flight in question is only 1 day, but breaking down $4 million to 1 day is around $11,000. If the plane carries 187 passengers and is full, then it's around $55 per passenger for the plane itself. Ouch. Next, we have the food on board. If complimentary, it will cost around $5 per passenger. Hence now why so many airlines now charge for fuel on board. Then we have the smorgasbord of other costs like insurance, advertising, office supplies, commissions, and communications for boarding. Lastly, the airline also needs to pay the airports to land and use the facilities. This cost greatly depends on the size of the plane, where they want to park it, and how long it's there. That's why we see some low-cost airlines like Ryanair and others park far away from the gate and use buses instead of a jet bridge. With all of these costs added up, you can now see why airlines scrape the very bottom of the barrel when it comes to profits. Or do they? Looking at the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a report from Qantas with its enormously profitable Airbus A380 flight from Sydney to Dallas, a profit of $428 million in revenue per year.
That comes to around $628,000 per flight, with an average return of $1,598 per passenger. For some passengers, this is more than double what they pay, $660 for an economy ticket, or a good chunk of change for first class at $8,030. So why is this flight so profitable? It's a combination of demand, the aircraft's low cost per seat, and a lack of sizable competition, allowing Qantas to charge whatever they like. The Australian Bureau of Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Economics broke down these costs. The Airbus A380, the largest passenger jet, costs between $26,000 and $29,000 per hour, using roughly $17,500 worth of fuel, or approximately $40 to $44 per mile. A more detailed look at the Qantas Airways flight offers a better understanding of typical costs. On a 14-hour A380 flight from Sydney to Los Angeles, the airline expenditures amount to $300,000, $11,000 in food and drink, $12,500 in staff pay, and $37,000 in airport taxes and navigation services, and around $250,000 in fuel to fly that 484-seat plane. Now we get to the main issue with long-haul flights in the low-cost market. You might have wondered, why doesn't an airline pick up an older Airbus A380 and fit it out with as many seats as possible, say 800, and then just operate that flight as cheaply as possible? Well, one airline technically did do this. Back in 2018, Norwegian hired an Airbus A380 to transport stranded passengers thanks to the grounding of the Boeing 787 fleet. Alas, they lost a fortune. Let's break it down. The Airbus A380 costs around $150,000 to operate per trip across the Atlantic, which is an average cost of $340 per passenger with 440 seats on board. At the time, Norwegian was charging around $200 to $341 per passenger, resulting in a profit on their best days of only $1. But what about our idea to fit as many seats on board as possible? Instead of 440 seats, we have 800 in all economy seats. At $26,000 per hour, the minimum price of tickets would need to be $32.50 per passenger per hour to just break even. Or for New York to London, $187.50 per ticket. This assumes that you can fit 100% of every seat and not leave a single seat empty. While it's certainly possible for a low-cost carrier to operate a long-haul A380, the profit margins are so slim that it would be financial suicide to do so. Who here thinks that they can run their own airline? Whilst you ponder that question, I'll dive straight into the Q&A. How this works is that I'll be taking the most common questions that I get from the comments of my YouTube channel, and I'll be seeing what I can do to best answer your questions. The very first question that I get asked quite a lot on this channel is, what programs do I use to make all of my animations? So I actually use Blender to create all the 3D models of all the planes. So everything that you see in all of my videos, any sort of 3D animation, I use Blender, which program is free, but it takes a lot of time and many hours to create these animations. But I am learning and I'm trying to get as better as quickly as possible so I can give you the very best in terms of 3D animations. It might not be Pixar quality, but it'll certainly be something that hopefully gets you excited every time you see one of my films. And then secondly, I use Premiere Pro and After Effects for all of the editing and laying down the music and putting everything together for these videos. Our next question is about the Virgin Galactic Mach 3 Concorde. A lot of people have asked that these Concorde designs are only designed for around about 10 to 20 passengers. This is because supersonic jet aircraft are designed for VIP transport. I know it may seem a little bit ridiculous, but when you're a billionaire, the only thing that you can't buy is more time. And billionaires love to travel. So if a billionaire was able to travel to the other side of the world, or even just around the corner on their continent, a lot faster than a commercial travel, then it is incredibly valuable indeed. And that's why we're seeing so many supersonic startups. Our next question is about whether or not Boeing or Airbus actually produces their own engines. They do not. The main engine manufacturers are General Electric, Rolls-Royce, and Safran. Now, what's interesting about this market is that they're not selling engines outright, but actually renting the engines to airlines and then selling engine hours. It's a really interesting topic, and you can expect a video on it very soon. This next question asks, why would you have beds on a supersonic plane? After all, you get to your destination in such a quick time, then you probably don't even need to sleep whilst in flight. But perhaps these rich people just want a way to have a nap whilst flying at Mach 3. Our last question asks, why would there ever be a need for trijets today? Well, it's actually a very interesting question because there is one area on Earth, and here I am in Google Earth, that twin-engine aircraft still can't go to. So twin-engine aircraft can do the Atlantic journey very well. However, twin-jet aircraft can't actually fly, say from Australia, they can't fly over Antarctica and then arrive to South America. Now, they can fly via Sydney and then go around New Zealand and then skirt around the edge there. However, they can't go from Perth, which is located here, straight directly over the South Pole and then go to Buenos Aires or Brazil up here. Now, why that's important is that Norwegian Airlines, the one that was actually featured in today's video, actually asked for the rights to fly from Argentina, from Buenos Aires, where it had a low-cost airline, to fly from there across with a Boeing 787 to Perth before then being able to go onwards into the lucrative market of Southeast Asia. You see, this huge market here with all these wonderful islands such as Bali, Thailand, Vietnam, and China is actually really hard to get to from South America. If you didn't know, South America is actually very far away indeed. However, a trijet with its 3 engines can certainly do the route. And then airlines like Qantas, who are using a Boeing 747 for the route, could actually save a fortune by using a trijet instead. If, of course, a modern trijet existed on the market. So thanks very much for joining me for this mini Q&A session. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments of the next video or this one down below, and then I'll endeavor to answer them next week. I now return you to your regular programming. And if you enjoyed this video today and want to see more just like it, then consider subscribing. And if you're looking for another way to support the channel, then I am pleased to announce that we've recently just made a Patreon. You can jump on there, you can see behind the scenes videos, you can join chat with other fellow patron members, and get access to exclusive live streams with your host. Thank you again so much for watching.
Airbus has a little bit of a problem. Emphasis on little. It now has 2 aircraft on its books that occupy the same size category, and a future in-demand project that threatens to cannibalize the very cash cow A320 that put them on the map in the first place. What are these aircraft and what can be done about it? Let's explore the tricky Airbus small plane problem. Thanks so much for clicking on this video today. If you like what you see, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Airbus makes many different planes, both big and small. However, one side of their product line is starting to get a little bit too heavy, and that's all thanks to overinvestment in a certain category. To explain, we need to dive straight back into the history books. After Airbus launched the A300, they looked at developing a new smaller aircraft for travel within Europe and for airlines in North America called the Airbus A320. Airlines were requesting a smaller plane from Airbus with greater range that they could use for small hops between cities like London to Paris or Singapore to Hong Kong. And Airbus partnered up with Singapore and China to develop the new type. This new aircraft, codenamed the AE-31X, would fly 125 passengers in a 2-3 configuration to a range of 2,000 nautical miles. Unfortunately, the deal fell through and Airbus decided to go it alone. They shrunk the A320 airframe to fit the market demand without doing a new clean sheet design. The two models that they created were the A318 and the A319, and they would be able to fly 136 passengers to a bigger range of around 3,500 nautical miles. Airbus would sell a few of these aircraft, notably to Air France, who would fall in love with the A318 baby bus. Flash forward to modern times to the arrival of Canadian airframe maker Bombardier. With gusto, this Canadian firm got to work building a new type of aircraft called the CS300, a modern 100-seater aeroplane to rival Brazil's Embraer and fill an important market niche left abandoned by the only other North American civil plane maker, Boeing. Boeing didn't take this move well, and despite not being in the market category themselves since the early Boeing 737s, they still moved to block the sale of the new plane in the United States. Many at the time believed that this was due to Delta ordering 100 of the new CS300 aircraft instead of the Boeing 737 MAX. This move was a major blow to the Canadian firm, who seemingly was shut out of the entire US market. But there was one way for Bombardier to get its CS300 and its smaller version, the CS100, back into the good old USA. If the aircraft was technically built within America, it would be considered a domestic product and no longer have to pay high tax tariffs. So if not Boeing, then the only other firm with sites to build planes would be Airbus and their Alabama finishing plant. The aircraft would be primarily built in Canada before moving down to Mobile to complete production and thus through the loophole enter the United States market. But this came at a huge cost, with Airbus acquiring a majority share in the CS program and renaming rights, calling the new plane the Airbus A220 series. This plane would be revolutionary. Compared to the Airbus A320 series, it would travel just as far and be more fuel efficient, although it wouldn't carry as many passengers. There are two versions of the A220, the original A220-300 and its shrink, the Airbus A220-100. Looking at the larger A220-300, it has a range of 3,400 nautical miles and can carry up to 150 passengers in its most dense configuration, while the Airbus A318 baby bus and Airbus 319 can fly up to around 3,500 nautical miles and are roughly over 150 passengers. While in earlier times that last load factor might have been a deal breaker for some airlines, in the age of 2020 in the aviation crisis, airlines have been more than ever asking for efficiency over passengers. A small plane that can go further is easier to fill up and make profitable than a lumbering aircraft. Essentially the very same reason why an aircraft like the Boeing 787 and Airbus A350 are favored over the A380 and Boeing 747. But this is where the problem gets more interesting. These two aircraft cater to the same range and passenger market, and it's left Airbus in a situation where the promotion of either will cannibalize the sales of the other. After all, rival Boeing doesn't compete in the market, so apart from other small plane maker Embraer, Airbus is only stealing customers from themselves. And clearly, looking at the sales numbers, airlines that prefer the newer A220 with all the advantages of newer engines, modern cabin designs and better fuel economy, so much so that airlines have asked for a stretched version of the original A220-300 to replace their existing Airbus A320 fleets. A major buyer of the small A318 baby bus, Air France, has even mentioned the A220-500 stretch in a recent investor meeting as part of its fleet modernization strategy. This stretch version would cover the inherent flaw of fewer seats on the Airbus A220 model and push the seats up to a maximum of 170 in a dense configuration, with also likely an increased range to boot. It would mean that the A220 series would now not only bite into the A318 and A319, but the A320 series as well. Airbus has already committed to a new engine option of both the A319, A320 and A321, so it's an investment that it doesn't want to see go to waste, Airbus might not be able to stand in the way of market demand, with the likes of not only Air France but Air Baltic and Delta keen to pick up the stretch version of the aircraft. And according to a very recent news, Air France plans to make a move to buy the Dash 500 stretch as soon as it can, or it might swing right over and buy the Boeing 737 MAX instead. If Airbus decides to make a larger version of the A220, that could make sense. Of course, now that the MAX is flying again, we could always look at that. And of course, there is always the A321, the LR and XLR. But perhaps it's not so bad to have two versions for customers to choose from. After all, the A320 order backlog is so huge that many airlines have ordered the A320neo still have many years to wait before they see their aircraft in the sky. The A220 series avoids that problem by being of a different production line with its own supply chain, that they could offer it as an alternative to airlines who don't want to wait for the A320. After all, it's better to have money in the hand than a potential future sale that may never come to fruition. Lastly, there is the matter of the third and very unknown project called the Airbus NSR, or New Short Range Project. This aircraft is supposed to be in development to replace the A320 family and usher in a new era of aircraft by 2030. But with the A220s nipping at the heels of the small plane market, it is unlikely that Airbus is keen to open a third product line. Thanks so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed this perspective on the Airbus small plane problem, then I'd love for you to leave a like, as it really does help the algorithm and this video. And comment down below with any ideas that you have for a future Found and Explained video. Thanks for watching.
The beluga whale is an Arctic and subarctic cetacean. It is one of two members of the family Montodontidae along with the narwhale. It is also known as the white whale, as it is the only cetacean of this colour, and also as the sea canary due to its high-pitched call. Wait, what do you mean? You said the beluga whale. What other type? Look, it's not my job to... Okay, fine, hold on. Here we go. The Airbus Beluga cargo plane is a special cargo plane conversion used by Airbus to transport aircraft shells from their manufacturing sites across Europe to the final assembly centres in France. In this video today, we're going to explore the history of the type, why Airbus built it, and what the future is for one of the strangest aircraft flying in the world today. And watch to the very end for a little surprise. The Beluga journey starts before the plane was even needed by Airbus. Initially, Airbus was a mix of companies spread across Europe, and for its planes the general arrangement was for the wings and landing gear to be made in the UK, the tail and doors in Spain, the fuselage in Germany, and the nose and centre section in France, with a final assembly in Toulouse. Thus, Airbus looked for multiple ways to bring the multi-site construction project together. The solution came in 1974 with a highly modified Boeing Stratocruiser, dubbed the Super Guppy. The fuselage of the Super Guppy was lengthened to 141 feet, or 43 meters, and ballooned out to a maximum inside diameter of 25 feet, or 7.6 meters, with the length of the cargo compartment being 111 feet or 34 meters long. This aircraft had a maximum load of 52,000 pounds or 23,000 kilograms. These planes had originally been created to transport the third stage of the Saturn V rocket, but would go on to be used by Airbus to transport parts of the A300 instead. Airbus had 4 of these aircraft, 2 from the original manufacturer and another 2 that they built themselves on license, run by a subsidiary called Airbus Transport International. Technically it's not an airline, it's just a transport from within the Airbus production line. But believe it or not, they make around $15 million a year from external charters. Anyway, back to the story. When the Airbus A320 became more popular and Airbus launched the A330 and A340 programs, they knew that their 4 Super Guppies were not going to be able to keep up.
Their age meant that the operating expenses were high and ever increasing, and a growing Airbus production required greater capacity than what could be provided by the existing fleet. Thus, they looked at their own lineup for a new cargo aircraft, settling on the Airbus A300 platform. This would be the first A300-600 ST Super Transporter, or the Beluga ST aircraft, and 5 would be built. To build these, Airbus would actually take half-built A300 and cut it in half. Why? As Bertrand George, the head of the Beluga XL program, said, the airframe had already been reinforced in certain areas, and in these days of composite materials, a traditional metal structure was easier to convert, the latter being important to achieving entry into service of the first aircraft. Building this aircraft would take around 3 years. And this plane would be much bigger than the Super Guppy. The A300-600 ST's freight compartment is 7.4 meters in diameter and 37.7 meters long, with a maximum payload of 47 tons. This would mean that the aircraft would be capable of carrying the heaviest part of the A340, the wing. By 2013, however, Airbus had become a victim of their own success. They were now producing aircraft at a rate of 60 a month of Airbus A320s across 4 final assembly lines in Toulouse, Hamburg, Mobile, and Tianjin, as well as 10 of its new aircraft, the A350s, per month. However, there was a problem with the existing Beluga aircraft. They could not transport an entire A350 on one flight. The plane would fly only the wing and one of the design drivers, as opposed to a complete ship set. Airbus needed a new aircraft to perform this role, one that was bigger and more powerful. Airbus did actually consider the Antonov AN-124 and a Boeing C-17, but they were found to be unsuitable. This new design also needed to instantly fit into the existing transport infrastructure of Airbus, such as the hangars, the airports Airbus used, as well as the same maintenance facilities as the existing Belugas. Initially, Airbus looked at the A340 as a template, but it would be too big to fit on the shorter runway at Hardwarden Airport in Wales, which was only 1,663 metres long. Airbus would put aside a small budget of €1 billion for the project for development and production, with them ultimately choosing the A330-200 as their base template. They would call this project the A330-743L, or the Beluga XL. The Beluga XL cargo bay is 6 meters longer than the ST, 1 meter wider, and half a meter higher. The Beluga XL also has the largest cargo bay cross-section of all existing cargo aircraft worldwide. Part of the length increase has been achieved by maintaining the full width further aft than ever before. This allows the outsized aircraft to carry a pair of A350 wings, as opposed to its contemporary, which was only a single unit. It operates at Mach 0.69 up to 11,000 meters, or 35,000 feet, with a relatively small range of 2,300 nautical miles, or 4,300 kilometers. This is a range increase of 900 nautical miles over the original ST model. As for the livery, with a smile and the eyes, that was actually the result of an internal vote with 20,000 Airbus employees choosing the final cheeky design. 6 of these aircraft will be used by operations by 2023, with the delivery of the last aircraft coinciding with the end of the original A300-600 operations. And now this is a retirement, mind you, for Airbus, but not retirement of its aviation use, leading us to the next question in this video. Now, looking at this fuselage, you might start to wonder, what if it was a passenger aircraft? After all, it would have a similar capacity to the Airbus A380 with its double decks, But would it actually have twin jet performance, especially if it used a more powerful engine like the Trent 1000 or GE9X? Plus, with the recent news that Airbus has been pushing for the Beluga series to be rated for ETOPS operations, flights over oceans like the Atlantic, this reality might be closer than you think. Well, why don't we sit down and crunch the numbers in another video and turn this mighty beast of a plane into a passenger aircraft? Stay tuned! Today's video would not have been possible without the support of my Patreons, who get to see each video early and get to choose the very next topic. And if you enjoyed this video today, be sure to subscribe for what seems to be a never-ending stream of plane videos, and leave a like. It really does help the algorithm. But for those who have made it this far into this video today, I have a little reward for you. Part 2 of this video right now. That's right, Part 2 of me turning this plane into a passenger aircraft is available unlisted on YouTube with a link down in the description called My Favorite Ice Cream right at the bottom. Boy, aren't you lucky. But be sure not to tell anybody else in the comments who didn't have the patience to wait around. This can be our little secret. Thanks so much for watching. With the departure of the Boeing 747 and Airbus A380, the Beluga XL is likely to become the largest commercial aircraft in the world still in production. With its large hump and vast interior space, it is perfectly suited for carrying aircraft components like a pair of Airbus A350 wings across Europe. But looking at the aircraft, you can't help but wonder if Airbus ever gave any thought to converting these planes into passenger usage. After all, wouldn't it have all the advantages of the Airbus A380 but with twin jet economics? In today's video, we'll be doing just that, breaking down the Beluga XL into a passenger aircraft, seeing how many it could carry, and if the idea makes any sense at all. Let's take off. If you haven't already seen part 1 of this video about why the Beluga XL exists, then you can check out the video here on the channel. It's a doozy with 3D models of all the types. So you managed to get your hands on a new Beluga XL. How? Why? Who knows? But now you've sent me this crazy email to turn it into a passenger plane. Let's start by seeing what we have to work with. The Beluga XL is 63.1 meters long and has a wingspan of 60 meters wide, which is around the same size of an Airbus A330-200, which is what the Beluga XL is based on. The real advantage, of course, is the internal area of the space. 2,209 square cubes of it. The internal area of the plane is 46 meters long, 7.9 meters tall, and 7.7 meters wide, not including the sub-level cargo deck for freight. Compared to the external cross-section of the A380, it's actually bigger on the inside. The Airbus A380 has a fuselage dimension of 8.4 meters, its cabin is 6.5 meters wide and 50 meters long, meaning our bad boy XL can fit so much in it. So let's install some seats. Time to do some maths. Looking at the cross-section of the plane, it's clear we can fit in 2 decks. Each deck would have a twin aisle design. These 2 aisles would be 40 inches combined width, or 1 meter, leaving us with 670 centimeters, or 264 inches to play with. If each seat was an average 18 inches wide, or 46 centimeters, that means we can fill in 14.5 seats across. This would have to be in a 3-4-4-3 configuration. And it seems, friends, that we have created a monster. We might have to take out a seat in the middle to make a 3rd aisle for FAA evacuation regulations, so we'll say 14 seats across. If the seats have 31 inches of legroom, or 70 centimeters, then we could fit in around 55 or so rows, leaving room for door spaces and lavatories. This would mean that on one deck, 14 passengers and 55 rows would be 770 passengers if all economy in the tightest configuration possible. If we include a second level, it's likely that we could get this plane up to 1,200 passengers if all economy. We would lose some more space for toilets, galleys and stairs, as well as the lower level being more narrow than upstairs. Naturally, we want to also include some premium space for our more esteemed viewers, which would mean bumping off around 500 passengers and including a full cabin of 22-inch business class seats instead on the lower deck. This deck, being based on the floor plan of the A330-200 fuselage, would be smaller with 525 centimeters or 17 feet and 3 inches across. This space would have the same twin aisles and fit 6 business class seats in a 1-2-1 open suite configuration. At 78 inches of legroom or 200 centimeters per seat, we could fit 20 or so rows, give or take a few areas for doors, galleys and a bar, because I love bars on planes, and this allows us to have 4 passengers per row or 80 passengers in total. This gives us a total capacity of around 880 passengers on board. The A380 by comparison is rated to 538 on the main deck and 330 on the upper. So yeah, suck it Airbus A380. The width of the plane would also lead to some pretty crazy ideas, such as including suites, private cabins, and even a restaurant and dining areas. After all, remember that cargo subdeck I mentioned? It's a cozy 16 meters long and shares the same width as upstairs. If not filled with passengers' suitcases or other freight, this deck could be a boarding lounge like the L1011 or a private sleeping cabin. The cockpit would be secluded away on this deck as well, with 4 passenger seats for crew members. Because the aircraft has a giant door on the front, this could actually be used as a way to very quickly board and disembark passengers. After all, the front of the plane comes off, and everyone could just get off that way. Alternatively, if the door functionality was removed, the front of the plane could just house a window that passengers on both decks could look out of. After all, the cockpit isn't in the way. And do you know what the craziest part of this idea is? The aircraft could be a combi plane. Because of the way it's designed, who's to say that the passenger section couldn't be slotted in and out where needed? If the airline wanted to operate cargo-only flights, then it could pull out the passenger tube from the cargo compartment and slot in cargo decks instead. The plane would also only have the footprint of an Airbus A330, and that would mean it could land at smaller airports and require no change to airport gates. Although to board so many passengers at once, the airports would likely use multiple jet bridges. This means that the plane would be very attractive to airlines and be incredibly flexible to fly nearly to any airport in the world. Now, let's be serious.
Can we get serious now?
There are some performance issues with the design, and that being the hype beast that I am, I haven't mentioned yet. Let's jump into it. This plane only has a cruise speed of Mach 0.69, meaning that it takes a little bit longer to get to where you need to go. It also only flies at a lower 11,000 meters or 35,000 feet, which would make it slightly more susceptible to clouds and other weather events. Lastly, and this is the real kicker, it only has a range of 2,300 nautical miles, or 4,300 kilometers. Why is this a problem? Well, you see, London to New York is 5,570 kilometers, or 3,008 nautical miles, putting the plane out of practical use for arguably one of the most popular routes in the world. The next problem is a bit more serious, and special thanks to subscriber Michael Bravo for crunching these numbers for us. If we have 600 passengers on board with an average weight of 75 kilograms or around about 165 pounds, I won't get into the average weight of the American passenger here, then that's a total of 45,000 kilograms or nearly 100,000 pounds, which is nearly the upper weight limit already. These passengers need something to sit on, Entertainment, food, water, windows, bathrooms, and more, adding up the weight. And that level in between the decks doesn't come cheap. Then the plane itself needs fuel, at least 73,000 kilograms of it to fly its maximum distance, and another 22,000 to reach New York, which is around 100,000 kilograms of fuel in total. But that's not all. We also need additional fuel for alternative destinations due to bad weather. 30 minutes for holding flight, another 30 minutes for holding time circling, and additional fuel for an engine going out in flight if the plane itself can fly loaded with just one engine. Adding this all up, you come to an upper limit of 188 passengers with no luggage, leaving most of the plane empty and with barely anything in the tank. Realistically, you would have just paid for a ticket on a giant paperweight that couldn't even leave Toulouse, let alone cross the Atlantic. At least there would be plenty of legroom. Now, you're likely thinking, Nick, this is great and all, and you're a handsome fellow, but this is never going to happen. Well, maybe, because it turns out that Airbus fully intends to sell or rent off the Beluga aircraft at the end of their service life at Airbus, likely within the next 20 years. This means that this aircraft could see a second life for all sorts of operations, including passenger. Airbus recently has gone as far to ask for ETOPS certification to fly the aircraft across oceans, meaning they are fully considering either using these planes for overseas charters or even considering increased production. And for those few people who are asking me in the comments how many passengers a beluga whale can carry from part 1 of this video, well, I suppose if you could tame it, perhaps around 2 or 3 people like a giant Pokemon. But then again, what do I know? I'm a plane channel. You're thinking of the whale channel, Discovery and Notified. And if you made it this far into the video and you haven't checked out my part 1, then you can do it here, where I go into the history of the type and why these aircraft are so fascinating. And as for the future of this series of turning crazy cargo planes into passenger versions, well, I know there's a pretty big other aircraft I wouldn't mind looking at. But that will have to wait for the next video. The Airbus A380 saw great success worldwide, becoming the de facto aircraft of choice for Emirates and a flagship plane of Qantas, British Airways, Air France, and many more to name a few. But it never got the same success in the United States or in the Western Hemisphere. Why did none of the big three, United, American, and Delta, order the Airbus A380? What would have it looked like had they had ordered it, and why do these reasons mean that we will never see big planes in the United States again? Let's jump in. Thanks so much for tuning in today. This is a mega video, so if you haven't subscribed, then I suggest you have a go. Click that red button and see what happens. It's free and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Airbus's biggest plane, the A380, was certainly within reach of US carriers and should have ticked all the boxes for an airline to turn a considerable profit. However, no North American or South American carrier for that matter ended up with the plane. Although 2 airlines did technically order the plane, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's discuss what made the A380 attractive in the first place. With a capacity of an average of 600 passengers depending on configuration, the Airbus A380 is the perfect plane for many airlines to operate. With so many seats, the aircraft can operate the lowest seat cost per passenger than any other aircraft. Meaning in a cutthroat price war, the A380 will always be able to allow the airline to get ahead of the competition. This feature also makes it perfect for high-capacity airports like London Heathrow, where a landing slot pair is worth millions of dollars, making multiple frequency operations impossible. The A380 also has an excellent range. knocking out at 8,200 nautical miles. For many airlines like Emirates and British Airways, the plane can nearly reach all of their destinations in the world, bar a few remote localities. Cough cough, Australia. And thanks to the vast amount of space on board, the Airbus A380 could fit all sorts of perks for those willing to pay for it, such as beds, private cabins, and even showers. Incredible! Airlines found that using the A380 on routes between hubs to be the most effective, such as linking cities like New York and London, or Singapore to Sydney. And here is where the problem lies with US carriers. Thus far, we have determined that the A380 works best on long-haul, high-density routes between hubs, but the North American market isn't suited for that type of aircraft. While the North American market does have large hub airports like LAX and in New York, these airports are only the tip of the airport iceberg in America. In fact, many of the daily flights leaving these hubs are not to another hub, but to smaller regional centers. These regional center airports, not equipped to take a plane like the Airbus A380, with no jet bridges to reach the second level, or their taxiways are not wide enough to take the plane, let alone have a market demand for 600 seats at a time. And speaking of market demand, we also need to consider the demand for multiple flights per day. While some routes do have well over 600 seats per day in North America, especially the aforementioned LAX to New York, passengers have shown a preference to choose different times to fly. They want hourly departures, or in the minimal case, a choice of a morning flight, a noon flight, an evening, and a late flight. An Airbus A380 is not flexible enough to offer these flight times, or in order to do so, the airline would need a fleet of Airbus A380s. Emirates does manage to do this with its London to Dubai route late last year, with multiple A380s leaving per day. But that's a special case with an airline with plenty of A380s and plenty of demand, a situation that is not often replicated in the United States. In addition to all of this, we also need to factor in the long-haul nature of the Airbus A380. It has long boarding times compared to other planes and is designed to fly long distances. In the United States, many of the routes that are in heavy use are shuttle routes linking major cities. The A380 isn't really designed for these quick turnaround routes, nor these short-haul connection shuttle routes. Although airlines might try to kick off using the A380 for a tiny route, much like the A380 flight from Sydney to Canberra in Australia, which is not actually open to domestic passengers and therefore is not really considered a profitable route. And speaking of profit, let's have a chat about making money with the Airbus A380. The A380 came to the market at a time when twin-jet airlines were all the rage with the Boeing 777 and the Airbus A330, where you only needed 4-engine aircraft for the most extreme of ocean routes. If you don't need to perform these long-haul ops, then it is far cheaper to operate a twin-jet aircraft instead. For example, an Airbus A380 is approximately $22,000 an hour to run, whilst a Boeing 787 Dreamliner is only around $9,000 per hour. Airlines would be smarter to operate 2 787 services than a single A380, flying each Dreamliner plane to a different destination in a hub-to-spoke model than a hub-to-hub model with the A380. And just to touch on profitability, imagine if a carrier doesn't fill up the whole A380 plane with those passengers. The A380 only has a low seat cost when the plane is full, and believe me, it's a lot easier to fill up an entire 300-seater twin jet than it is to fill up a 600-seater A380. Lastly, the A380 doesn't have a second life on the market as a cargo plane, unlike the Boeing 747. This is because of a myriad of other factors, but simply put, it isn't really set up for cargo operations. The aircraft's airframe is too heavy when empty that cargo operators will run out of lifting capacity before they run out of empty space on board, meaning that cargo airlines like UPS and FedEx, who operate daily night flights with cargo and favor a single flight over frequency, still don't see a reason to update to the type. Both of these carriers, FedEx and UPS, did order the A380 when it was first announced, so technically 2 US airlines did actually order it, but then they ended up cancelling it, with FedEx Express cancelling its 10 A380s back in 2006 and UPS its 10 A380s in 2007. After delays to the A380 passenger program led to the cargo program pushed back almost indefinitely. And you can watch all about this unbuilt future of the Airbus A380 in this video right here. So the question remains, did any of the US carriers get close to ordering the Airbus A380? Did United, Delta, or American Airlines really consider the double-decker airframe when it was launched back at the turn of this millennium? And if they didn't, what was their excuse? Back in 2014, Steve Dixon, Delta's SVP for flight operations, said that we don't see an application for the A380 in our network. Dixon added that 4-engine planes, such as the A380, were no longer viable aircraft options for most of Delta's markets. The reliability of the 2-engine airplanes and efficiency of them is just too compelling. As for American Airlines, it was actually the airline's lack of major hubs that made it shy away from the A380. Speaking to Business Insider in 2014, American Airlines Vice President of Planning, Vasu Raja, said, "The reality is that we just don't funnel all of our traffic into one hub," referencing Emirates and their Dubai hub. "We operate out of 9 different hubs in the US, and because there is no single hub where you can pull 500 people worth of demand every single day and make that work. If you could do it, then you would do it on a few routes, but not enough to go buy the 20 or 30 or 40 airplanes you would need to justify to having the infrastructure of an airplane like that." Lastly, looking at United, we can see that the A380 just didn't fit into their business model, as their preference is to offer as many flights as possible throughout the day. Instead of 1 flight a day and fill it up like an A380, we would rather serve a market with a couple of wide bodies if the demand was there, because business passengers certainly like that, favouring frequency over a single flight. According to the United spokesperson, high frequency is the name of the game for important money-making routes such as New York to London, that the mammoth Airbus jet simply doesn't work for the airline's network. As for the other carriers in the United States, such as JetBlue, Frontier, Alaskan, and so forth, they had actually all moved onto twin-jet engines and didn't have the operations that needed an Airbus A380 and were likely not in a place during the aviation market depression following 9/11 to consider the aircraft, well worth $500 million in the early 2000s. Now, for a fun experiment, we should consider the question of what market conditions or what reasons that would make a US carrier want or even need an Airbus A380. There are a few ways off the top of my head. We might have seen an A380 be deployed for weekend flights to and from Hawaii for holiday makers trying to escape for the weekend, from West Coast airports like SFO, and much like how ANA deploys its Airbus A380s to Hawaii from Tokyo. Because the flights are not for business customers, there isn't really any pressure to leave multiple times a day. A single holiday maker flight can suffice once a day. In terms of international routes, we might have seen the New York to Brazil flight with an Airbus A380. With a large business market and plenty of demand in good times, the link between these two cosmopolitan hubs would have been dominated by an Airbus A380 airline, either a US carrier or perhaps even an attempt from Brazil itself. A last example might have been the flights from Dallas to Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. Qantas operates an A380 from Texas to the country and makes the tidy sum, in a video which you can see right here. And now this is a market that US carriers haven't really been able to take advantage of against their Australian air quotes, rival. Any other routes from North America would have simply been replications of routes that we see today with the A380. And these North American carriers would simply use their A380s as a competitive advantage over their rivals. We wouldn't really see the A380 used for domestic flights, much like we never see the A380 used for domestic flights in Australia, France, or the United Kingdom. And of course, this is all definitely a fantasy scenario and never came to be. When the Airbus A380 arrived, the market was slowly changing, with US carriers slowly falling out of love with big aircraft like the Boeing 747. If Boeing, a homegrown US enterprise, couldn't get their carriers to buy the 747, then Airbus had less hope than ever with its own Airbus A380. And this is actually a sign of the future. The US carriers can't really see themselves booking down for an aircraft seating over 400 passengers, let alone up to 600 or even 800 in an all-economy configuration. All for different reasons, the result is the same. No Airbus A380 and no large aircraft anymore. This includes the new Boeing 777X, which actually could very well be seen as the next large jumbo jet aircraft after the Boeing 747 and Airbus A380 in the marketplace, with its large folding wings and high passenger capacity. However, like those planes, no US carrier has ordered the 777X. If you think about it, it's actually a rather shocking development that an airline in Boeing's bread and butter market area has yet to order the new jumbo jet aircraft. So far, the largest orders that have come from this area with United Airlines has been the Boeing 787-10, with 10 aircraft on its future fleet plan. The same fate could also be said of Airbus with the Airbus A350-1000, the spiritual successor to the Airbus A380, which does not have any deployment by any of the big three carriers in North America. LATAM in South America does have a few Airbus A350-1000s on order, and they might find their way to Delta through a complicated partnership much like the earlier Airbus A350-900s, but as this carrier went bankrupt this year, it's more likely that these planes will go to Qatar instead. And without that rich North American market snapping up large aircraft, we have seen the Airbus A321XLR and Boeing 787 come to dominate, and it is unlikely that any manufacturer, be it Boeing, Airbus, or anything from the Far East, will ever consider a large aircraft again, bringing an end to the jumbo jet craze, which for myself personally is a real shame. Now you face a choice. Will you watch a story about the Airbus small plane problem, or would you like to check out the Boeing Sonic Cruiser story, an aircraft designed by Boeing to be completely different as a competitive edge against the A380? Click to choose, and I'll see you in the next video. And before we go today, I would like to do a special shout out to my Patreon. Specifically Laura Sanborn, who has joined our community, and I thank you so much for supporting the channel. Have a great day. What is the future of the Airbus fleet? In the next 20 years, what new aircraft can we expect from Europe's de facto aerospace giant? Today, we will go over what we predict will be the 3 new aircraft that we will see from Airbus, what they will be like to fly, and how they will impact the world of aviation. So, without further ado, let's fly to the world of tomorrow today. Hey, it's me, Nick here from Found and Explained. If you like this video today, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stick around for more. For the last 40 years, Airbus has been a major influence on the aerospace landscape of the world, especially with the commercial line of aircraft. Since entering the market, the company has come up with various models with all capabilities to fill every niche. However, since then the firm has slowed down with aircraft releases, and new aircraft announcements have been few and far between. The most recently new aircraft to come from Airbus is the A321XLR, a long-range narrow-body aircraft that has won orders left and right and will make point-to-point travel a breeze like never before, which we'll get to in a future video. But what happens next? What is the next game-changer new aircraft that we can expect from Airbus? The first new aircraft that will enter the market will be more familiar than you may realize, and that will be the Airbus A350neo. That's right, after bringing the Neo series to both the A320 and A330, Airbus will next bring its Neo concept to the popular A350 program. Naturally, the A380neo was also considered, but as the aircraft series is concluded, it is almost impossible that we will see it. But I've done a full video on the A380neo and other A380 variants that we never seen that you can watch all here on the channel. So what will the A350neo be like? As with the A330neo series, there will be a slight adjustment to the criteria, with two versions of the A350neo focusing on either capacity or range. We will see an increase in passenger capacity to match the capacity of the Boeing 777X, which is around 20 to 40 more passengers than the A350-1000, and fill in the void left in the market from the departure of both the Boeing 747 and Airbus A380, a market of around 400 passengers. The other version of the A350neo will be one to match the range requirements of an airline like Qantas for Project Sunrise. You may recall that both Qantas and Singapore operate or plan to operate an A350 for ultra long haul routes, such as Sydney to London or Singapore to New York. A new Neo A350 would likely take this market into account and will have a range well beyond the current A350-900 ultra long-range aircraft. This long-range version will have a range over 10,000 nautical miles and fly for 21 hours or longer. The second aircraft that is on Airbus's future plan is a new narrow-body clean-sheet design. That's right. The Airbus A320 will be no more from 2035 onwards, with Airbus launching a true clean sheet version of the airframe as a replacement. But here's what we predict. The new narrowbody will fill in the A321neo market segment, with an Airbus A220 moving up to a -500 series to help cover the A319 and A320 market. This narrowbody platform could very well be shrunk to fill in an existing A320 demand and stretched upward to fill in a proposed A322 space. This space would be the middle of the market of 250 passengers to a range of 5,000 nautical miles. Narrow-body economics, but in a role filled by wide bodies today. So now that you know, you're probably wondering to yourself, what is Airbus waiting for? Well, there are actually two requirements that we know that they need before they can realize any of these new aircraft designs. The first is ultra-high bypass jet engines, typically known as the next generation of jet engine design. These engines, like the GE9X on the Boeing 777X, have so much power to weight ratio that planes can fly further and on less fuel. Airbus needs these engines before they can enter the market to ensure that their future generation aircraft can remain competitive to rivals Boeing and Embraer. They obviously don't want to have these new planes operating previous generation jet engines. Airbus expect there to be engines for these airframes in the next 5 to 7 years. Rolls-Royce, Safran and Pratt & Whitney have all said that they're pursuing such designs. The London-based Rolls-Royce firm has earmarked a service entry into 2025 for its UltraFan model, whilst France Safran is working on a demonstrator they'll be ready for ground tests by around 2021 next year. And the last engine manufacturer is also testing a similar upgrade to its geared turbofan and trying to get it out in the next decade. And it's interesting too because Rolls-Royce, who powers the Airbus A350 with its jet engines, doesn't actually supply any engines for the Airbus narrow-body market. Likely they will see this new UltraFan as a way that they can enter back into that space and take a bigger part of the narrow-body market pie. The other task that Airbus is working on is digitizing its production lines and planning to build another 2 product lines for the A350neo and this new narrow-body, the latter of which will likely be at the old Airbus A380 production facility. They need to test run build rates of 100 narrow bodies as well as 20 Airbus A350neos a month, which is around double the current rate of 60 A320s and 10 A350s a month. So before we wrap up today's video, a final question would be if these aircraft will ever be built. For a fact, we know that part of a multi-billion-dollar bailout given to Airbus this year includes a commitment to research and develop a new clean sheet aircraft, and also another using a new fuel source with 0 emissions by 2035. Airbus's Director of Strategy, Antoine Bolivar, has said that this will be an essential effort, saying, "We're going from a public R&D budget of $135 million per year to $300 million this year, and then $600 million per year in 2021 and 2022. That's plenty of money to build the aircraft of the future." But a counterpoint to this argument is that Airbus is very confident in its A320neo program, and it seems unlikely that they would want to throw away all of its progress so far with a new narrow-body clean sheet design that is unproven and doesn't have the enormous back orders. Especially with Boeing ironing out the, and I say this with a full understanding of the background of the situation, problems of the Boeing 737 MAX. If Boeing is ready to go toe-to-toe with Airbus in the narrow-body market, then Airbus doesn't want to leave the proverbial market empty once it goes off on a new aircraft folly. When asked about the new aircraft of tomorrow, Airbus replied to Bloomberg that, as a leading aircraft manufacturer, we're always looking at ways to advance our product line. There are many studies, but not all see the light of day. But you know what? I have a great feeling about these 3 aircraft. What do you think? Have we hit the money on the head, or are we way off the mark? Let me know down in the comments. And if you're an Airbus engineer and you watch this and you know how close we are to the truth, maybe give us a little bit of a clue. I'll keep an eye out. And if you enjoyed the video today, then I'd love a like and for a subscription. It's free and you can quit anytime. To read more detail about this project and see behind the scenes in today's video, including all the models featured, then check out the website foundandexplained.com. We have quizzes as well where you can try to get a 10 out of 10 result from this video. And then lastly, if you want to support the channel, then we have a fantastic Patreon page that you can check out here. For a few dollars in donations a month, you can get access to topic voting, choosing what comes next on the channel, and explore much more Found and Explained. I'll leave a link down in the description. Thank you again so much for watching. The words next generation frustrate me. Boeing and Airbus are both guilty of claiming that their planes are the next game changer in aviation and that the future is just around the corner. But these planes are just a reiteration of a theme. They are simply the same old 1960s to 1980s designs with a slightly better engine and tacked on client-facing features like LED lights and fancy windows that dim. So this video will be more of an open letter to the aviation industry. I'm going to ask, where are all the planes that were promised? And where is the innovation in aircraft design? If you like this video by the end, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. So far, only 6% of my viewers are actually subscribers, so, call to action, on with the show. Now, in the intro of this video, I made some pretty big claims that aircraft producers like Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, and Bombardier, hopefully said that right this time, haven't really innovated in well over 40 years. And I ask, where are all the new planes? Well, let me explain. Let's start with Boeing. Boeing hasn't really made a new design, apart from the Boeing 787, in many years. The 707 was their first, followed by the 737 and 747, both which are now up to 4 generations. Then there is the 777, which is nearing its own 3rd generation with the 777X, and any calls for new aircraft from Boeing are simply X versions of the 757 and 767 in the form of the 797. The 787 was a totally clean sheet design and really brought new technology forward, but all these other planes don't really seem to have been anything that new. Why haven't Boeing used the learnings from the 787 and created a new clean sheet design? Sure, the Boeing 737 MAX has features from the 787, but we all know what happened there. You can check out my latest video on the 737 MAX here, where I go into much more detail. Airbus is guilty of this as well. They have the Airbus A320, which has now a Neo version, standing for a new engine option. And that's all there is. The same airframe design, but with new engines with some bells and whistles like large cabin storage and LED lights. This has been successful enough for Airbus that they rolled out the Neo program to the A330 series, and there are rumours that it will also offer an A350 Neo in the next few years. Airbus also proposed multiple versions of the A380 program, including a Neo version, but that never got off the ground due to low customer demand. Again, I've gone into way too much detail in another video all about this that you can check out here. Airbus does have the Airbus A220 program that I consider a true next generation aircraft. It can easily crush the A320 series, especially the A318 and A319, and not to sound like a broken record at this point, but I also have a video all about that right here. I could also argue that the A350 is a new design and a very good one at that, but it's actually a spiritual clean sheet successor to the Airbus A340, so points there as well. So then perhaps the answer lies on new market players like China's Comac with its C919 series, or perhaps the rumblings we hear from Japan and its own homegrown aviation industry. These future aerospace giants have no need to follow the ways of the West and could very well bring to the market an aircraft design that is truly the next generation of aircraft. I should also point out that perhaps market forces are to blame as well. As we have seen with the Boeing 747 and the Airbus A380, the market has slowly trended away from larger aircraft and hub-to-hub travel to more point-to-point travel with smaller, more fuel-efficient aircraft. Airlines are now seeking planes that can fit into existing airport infrastructure, such as the gates and the runways that we typically see, that are as fuel-efficient as possible and are as comfortable as possible for passengers. Plus, with any brand new aircraft type that comes to the market, and I'm talking about a truly innovative aircraft design that is unlike the standard tube and 2 engines that we see, there is going to be a whole bunch of research required to become a certified type. You see, the government agencies that certify these aircraft are actually incredibly familiar with this design, and I dare say they have an existing framework for certifying these types of aircraft. If you create a brand new type of aircraft, say something along the lines of a blended wing design, then it's going to be a very different legal process indeed, and probably many more years until the general public becomes comfortable enough to fly on board. This video is sponsored by my new channel, Aviation Station. Check it out below. The year is 2049. Paris's newly renovated terminal at Charles de Gaulle Airport is hosting a very special aircraft, Airbus's first hypersonic scramjet commercial airliner. This new age aircraft is able to fly 200 passengers up to a top speed of Mach 6 using scramjet technologies developed in the year 2021. Crossing the Atlantic in under 2 hours, this will change the game just like the jet engine did to the propeller and usher in a new age of flying. Are you ready? Put on your seatbelt because it's going to be very fast. Welcome to the hypersonic Mach 6 future. This hypersonic concept aircraft is called the Draco, and it is a fantasy envisioning of a future of aviation as we know it today. It's designed for trunk routes, those flown by aircraft like the Boeing 777 or the Airbus A350 between capitals like Paris, New York, or London to Singapore. But these planes will go much faster, clocking in under 2 hours between North America and Europe, and even quicker over the North Pole to Asia. Unlike the planes that we fly on today, the hypersonic concept plane's engines are decidedly different. This aircraft has twin TBCC engines, or known as the turbine-based combined cycles engine concept. This is how it works. It's all about having the most efficient engine at the right speed. At low speeds, the plane uses a typical turbofan engine to fly and cruise like a normal plane today would. When the aircraft is over the ocean, however, it will switch to its ramjet and move up to and beyond the sound barrier. The turbojet will then shut down until needed or when the aircraft slows down to come into landing. Whilst both engines share an inlet and outlet for airflow, they will have separate airflows inside of the fuselage. This would allow the aircraft to have a speed up to Mach 3 at 95,000 feet, or perhaps as fast as Mach 6 where applicable. Because the aircraft moves so darn fast, its tail is effectively useless for steering. Thus, the design has two canards at the nose of the plane. When it comes to range, this will greatly depend on fuel. This radical design will require at least some form of hydrocarbons or eco-fuel, and is still unlikely by 2050 that we have any other alternative, as this type of fuel is so light and energy dense. For regional travel, however, aircraft would have likely switched to some form of electrical power or hydrogen, but that's a video for another time. You might have also noticed that there are no windows on board, even for the pilot on the flight deck. That's because not only are windows a structural weakness and make the aircraft weigh more, but that super high definition television monitors will be used instead, and are able to show passengers a realistic version of the outside, or anything they want for that matter. Who wants to look at clouds whizzing by when you could literally be anywhere? And if we're really shooting for the moon with this concept, then we could suggest that the entire passenger compartment would also have the ability to be modular and be swapped out when arriving at an airport. As boarding is a wasted time for aircraft on the tarmac, this would allow more operations at packed airports per day, and passengers would be able to board the module at the airport separately, finding their seats, and then be loaded to the airframe itself when it was time for takeoff. These modules would also be able to be swapped out for cargo versions or perhaps commercial spaces such as bars or bedrooms on board. Now, many of the boffins in the comment section are itching to write why this idea is totally unrealistic. So let's talk about some of the roadblocks that are in the way for this fantasy creation. There are some major roadblocks before we see this technology become more feasible. Namely, the first is high-speed legislation, particularly towards sonic booms. In many countries in the world, aircraft are not allowed to project a sonic boom whilst in flight as they travel through their airspace, making such a concept that breaks the sound barrier impossible. It is, however, possible that this aircraft flew high enough that the boom would be minimal, but likely that any aircraft design would be restricted to specific high-speed corridors, like over the North Pole or only over oceans. This would seriously limit the routes that it could fly. This aircraft is also missing some considerable material science. The aircraft would require a totally new material technology to not only survive the high speeds without breaking up, but also be cheap enough for airlines to afford. Thus far, the only Mach 6 aircraft that is in public development, the SR-72, will easily cost $1 billion each, double the list price of the Airbus A380. And we didn't even mention the cost to develop the aircraft for Boeing or Airbus in the first place. So if an airline wants this plane, it's going to have to be much, much cheaper. Cooling will also be an issue. The skin of this aircraft, probably made of titanium, will get as hot as 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit during flight because of air friction, and thus there will have to be some sort of internal cooling system, such as liquid nitrogen, in thousands of small tubes under the surface of the aircraft to stop the passengers frying like an egg. This is actually a major hurdle if we want to take the plane even higher than Mach 3, up to a possible Mach 20, which is the fastest aircraft that we have ever made. So that leaves us with the last question: when will we ever see this type of design? When we look back at the history of aviation, there are several different defined eras. There is the first era of actually getting an aircraft up into the sky, then the propeller, followed by the jet engine and all of its various turbofan designs, and then with the invention of the hypersonic ramjet. Even a quick curious look into the past shows us a time when passengers looked towards military projects with glee, wondering when they too will have their own jet-powered planes. Likely we will see hypersonic aircraft start with the military and then become private business jets like Gulfstream and Boom before entering the mainstream. So the question is, how soon will we see this technology fall into the hands of the common man and woman who, for the small price of $200 or its equivalent Bitcoin-based currency in 2049, to fly Mach 6 anywhere in the world? We know that the military is working on several different ramjet and scramjet designs that can push an aircraft up to and beyond Mach 6. One such project is the mysterious Lockheed SR-72, which is under development in the United States as a replacement for its spy plane program, which you can enjoy watching right here on the channel. Other projects include Boom Supersonic Overture, the prototype aircraft that was recently unveiled this year and will likely start flight tests very soon. United, Japan Airlines, and Virgin Atlantic have all signed up to get these Concorde Mk2 aircraft for their own fleets for the future. There is also another huge elephant in the room who is working on their own hypersonic vehicle: Boeing. Boeing has a long history of working on projects that go shockingly fast, and even at one point were working on their own American version of the Concorde, the Boeing 2707. So far there is no specific timeline for their concept aircraft, only that it is 20 to 30 years away. Looking over all the research for this video, you can't help but get a sense that this technology is about to usher in an inevitable wave of technological advancement. The future is coming, and it's coming faster than you think. In this video, we will outline Airbus's vision of aviation's future across Europe and the world, featuring aircraft flying on zero-emission hydrogen fuel and electric batteries, from familiar turbofan jets to future cabins to conceptual blended wings. Let's wind the clock forward and see what Airbus has in store for us in the world of tomorrow. Welcome to Found and Explained. I have many videos just like this one on the channel, so check it out, and if you like, subscribe. The first of three major concepts unveiled today by Airbus is the new zero-emission aircraft labelled the Zero-E. Planned to enter the market by 2035, it will be powered by hydrogen-based fuel instead of petrochemicals or electric batteries. What is hydrogen fuel, you may ask?
Well, the basic understanding is that liquid hydrogen is burned with oxygen in a gas turbine, which then creates a highly efficient hybrid electric propulsion system. The resulting emissions of hydrogen dioxide, or commonly known as water, is released into the atmosphere, chemically, radioactively, and pollutant-free. The only real zero-emission technology that is possible on the market today. The killer is that hydrogen fuel can work with existing aircraft technology and can relatively match some of the potential done by jet fuel. By tweaking the way an aircraft engine works, only the engines need to be upgraded to any existing airframe. Hence why Airbus is so optimistic to bring it to the market by 2035. Airbus has created 3 concept aircraft that will use this technology. The first is a hydrogen turboprop that looks like the ATR-72 or the Q400 that is used mostly in regional networks today. It will have a range of around 1,000 nautical miles and be powered by 2 special hydrogen turboprop engines. These aircraft will carry just under 100 passengers in a normal configuration, but it is designed for regional feeder routes for bigger airlines, so its specifications suit it perfectly. The second, designed by Airbus, carrying 200 passengers to a range of 2,000 nautical miles, this aircraft looks just like the planes that we see flying in the world today, although with no emissions. The range is perfect for most routes, as the average distance traveled by most flights today is only 1,240 nautical miles, or 2,300 kilometers. The last concept, and by far the most interesting, is the blended wing concept. This will seat passengers and carry cargo in a completely different way than modern aircraft, but as the aircraft itself is the wing, it will be able to shave tens of percentiles off its fuel burn, affording a longer range and being able to carry more passengers.
Because this architecture allows more space, more volume to store fuels, to store hydrogen in this case. So it gives much more freedom to much more design space to install passengers and hydrogen.
One airline has already shown heavy interest in these concepts: European low-cost carrier EasyJet. EasyJet remains absolutely committed to a more sustainable flying, and we know that the technology is where the answer lies for the industry. But what will it be like to fly on board these aircraft? Airbus has also released several cabin innovation concepts that show off the way we will experience their new aircraft in the future. For one, there will still be windows, unlike a certain supersonic aircraft that I featured a few weeks ago. I'll put the link up at the top. There will be, however, augmented reality on the walls that will improve visual fidelity, allowing people to access data or see outside of the cabin with widescreen. The second concept is creating spaces for those on board the aircraft. These concepts are called living spaces and can be modified for certain activities, such as exercise or a bar for those to mingle. Airbus has also suggested that the airlines of the future will provide sleeping opportunities, air quotes, such as lie-flat bunk beds. Although I personally can't imagine a scenario in which an airline would choose to add in long beds, overcharging customers to sit back to back in the densest configuration as possible. This is quite an optimistic view of the future. The concepts we unveil today will offer the world a glimpse of our ambition to drive a bold vision for the future of zero-emission flight, said the Airbus CEO today. I strongly believe that the use of hydrogen, both in synthetic fuels and as a primary power source for commercial aviation, has the potential to significantly reduce aviation's climate impact. And last, there are some flaws to this hydrogen technology that we should discuss. For one, we're talking about a fuel type that isn't produced on the scale that is required by airlines around the world. Even biofuel production, that has seen massive advancements in recent years, is light years behind having any real impact on operations for airlines. For example, KLM would use up the entire world's supply of biofuels in less than a day at peak operations. That's how little there is. And we're talking about another fuel type that doesn't even exist on the same scale as biofuels. Plus, the range offered by hydrogen is much smaller than the range offered by jet fuel, and it is likely that aircraft flying today will never actually switch over. You can't fly more than 2,000 nautical miles on this technology, so while the idea is ambitious, there is still a need for long-haul aircraft burning petroleum to link distant cities. But who's to say that future versions, such as a 2.0 hydrogen aircraft, can't compete on the same transatlantic journeys? Then we have airports. Airports will require significant hydrogen transport and refueling infrastructure to meet the needs of day-to-day operations. Support from governments will be key to meet these ambitious objectives with increased funding for research and technology, and there will need to be mechanisms that encourage the use of sustainable fuels and the renewal of aircraft fleets to allow airlines to retire older, less environmentally friendly aircraft earlier. Lastly, Airbus has a poor track record when it comes to environmental aircraft concepts. They plan to fly an electric aircraft this year called the E-Fan X that had a single electric engine on its wings and 3 jet fuel engines, in partnership with Rolls-Royce, although they ended up cancelling the entire project this year in April. So will these hydrogen aircraft see the light of day? I won't be holding my breath. According to Airbus, the world is bright, clean, although we all might get a little bit wet. With air travel firmly on the front line of climate change, any movement in the right direction to emissionless travel is very good indeed. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I have a range of videos on this channel about concept aircraft from the past and future that have never been built, and I'm excited to share what I find. So dive in, and if you like what you see, subscribe. Thanks for watching.
This hyper transport plane can carry more than a 747, fly further than any other cargo aircraft, and is far more fuel efficient. This is the futuristic cargo competitor to the Antonov AN225, built by both Boeing and Airbus. In today's video, we'll be exploring the future of cargo planes. What would a future heavy lift cargo aircraft look like, and why it may never be built? So let's jump in, and if by the end of the video you feel like I've entertained you with this what if, then a like is appreciated. The Antonov AN225 is the world's largest and most powerful cargo plane. It can carry heavy and bulky items like generators or a mining drill across the world. Particularly useful for landlocked destinations that are inaccessible by road or too far from the sea. And has paid itself in spades when timing is key, like when it needed to transport the engines for the new Boeing 777X across North America. But for all its usefulness, it does have some flaws. The first is the fact that there is only one AN225 in existence, with a second airframe hidden half-built in a warehouse. This plane was originally built for the Soviet version of the space shuttle, and it was never really intended to be the de facto heavy lift aircraft that the world needs today. It is relatively slow, it doesn't have a great range when it's fully loaded, and it burns a ton of fuel to get where it needs to go. Simply put, it's old technology, and its operators charge a huge premium to the market and doesn't have the versatility that we have seen from more modern platforms like the Boeing 747-8 series, which is both a freighter and a fantastic passenger aircraft. That leads us to the topic of today's video. What would it look like if Boeing and Airbus combine their forces to build their own version of the AN225? This plane would be a modern heavy lift aircraft utilizing the very best in new technologies, with the learnings from other passengers and cargo airframes like the A380 and 747, with the combined efforts of both aerospace firms, a truly world-class giga flying machine. This plane would be called the Proteus, after the Greek god of the same name who served Poseidon and was capable of changing his shape at will to serve the task at hand. A fitting description, don't you think? This beast would have 6 high bypass engines, such as the GE9X found on the Boeing 777X, or a future derivative, and would have a range greater than that of the AN-225, or at least equal to the 747-8F. With better engines and using the learnings in fuel efficiency, we would expect this aircraft to have a load distance greater than 4,120 nautical miles. Its unique design would afford plenty of advantages, with a double tail at the end to allow more space on board, something that we have already seen utilized by the world's largest wingspan plane, the Stratolaunch. Its engines and wings would use fuel-saving technology derived by the 787 series, such as saw teeth or chevrons on the back of the engine casing to help reduce noise generated from the operation of the engine. This less noise would make it better around urban environments and would also save fuel as it flies, as the energy is not turned into noise. The wings would also use raked wingtip technology like on the Boeing 777X or A350 to reduce fuel burn while cruising. And when it comes to cargo carrying capacity, this is where it gets interesting. This aircraft would be able to load in full containers like those found on trains, trucks and boats, and fill in the missing link found in intermodal delivery channels, directly into the cargo cabin using its own onboard lift technology. This would mean that while it wouldn't be as long as the 747 and not suitable for tall items like aircraft wings, it would be more flexible for boxy items like giant turbines or engines. Plus, the internal crane system would make it very useful for remote airports where infrastructure wouldn't be the same as at a normal facility, like at a mining outpost in the heart of Africa. We would also require that this aircraft to carry at least 200 tons, or around 450,000 pounds, much like the AN-225. Likely we won't be able to carry much more, but the range would be extended with a full load on board than our current equivalent. For comparison, the AN-225 carrying 200 tons can only fly 4,000 kilometers or 2,159 nautical miles. There is even a possibility to turn it into a combi version with passengers on board as well. Because the front of the aircraft is significantly more narrow than the rear, we would be able to fill this with around 200 passengers in an all-economy configuration, allowing the airline operator to seemingly double dip with passengers and cargo, especially useful for island destinations such as the Caribbean, Mediterranean, and more that have demand for both. And when it comes to markets, it is likely that this aircraft of such power and fuel consumption, there are 6 engines after all, would struggle to find buyers. One last huge advantage of this aircraft would be its potential military applications. Such a heavy lift aircraft might actually be highly sought after by the military forces around the world, as it would be able to carry heavy machinery or weapons like tanks and tons of supplies for troops around the world. The US Air Force is an obvious buyer of such a plane, although if they did buy it, it would limit the amount of overseas partners that would be invested in its development. After all, you wouldn't want any state secrets to leak out to foreign agents. But alas, it is likely that this aircraft will never be built, and it's for the same reason why big aircraft today are simply not needed. Let me explain. The big issue with cargo carriers is twofold. For one, cargo companies don't really care so much about fuel savings and lowering the cost per kilo of cargo, because they're more than happy to simply increase the rate that they charge companies for transport. And for a plane that can carry unique cargo like the AN-225 or this Boeing and Airbus competitor, they don't really care about being competitive. Because after all, where else are you going to go? The second issue is the availability of other platforms. There are very few jobs that the AN-225 can perform that other aircraft can't, and there are a lot of other aircraft, or passenger planes that can be converted that can do everything else in between. For example, we have yet to see the next generation of cargo carriers, such as A350s, 787s, or 777Xs, that can be converted into cargo operations. There is even a possibility that we will see a converted A380 for cargo flights, although as I've mentioned in plenty of other videos about the future of cargo A380s, this is a slim possibility, thanks to the heavy weight of the airframe. But you can check more about the detail right here in this video all about the A380 variants. We also need to consider its market potential, or lack thereof, of a competitor to the AN-225. It is likely that any other aircraft of such power and fuel consumption, there are 6 engines after all, would struggle to find buyers. Make no mistake, operators like DHL and FedEx would jump on a chance to have an aircraft like this in their fleet, but only if it's as cheap as a second-hand, already built and proven aircraft like the 747. And for this reason, the airframe would need to be heavily subsidized by either cargo airlines like Atlas or government agencies. But when the AN-225 finally retires, the world is going to need a new heavy-lift aircraft, and a concept plane like the Proteus Hypertransport will be waiting. Thanks so much for watching today's mini What If episode. It was a lot of fun to make, and consider the unique attributes that make a plane like the AN-225 so sought after in the market and yet so rare, and why no other company has yet attempted to build such a beast of an aircraft. What do you think? Could such an aircraft exist in the market, or is this era gone and the AN-225 is just the last of its kind? Let me know down in the comments. Today's video would not have been possible without the help from my Patreons, and the others who have supported the channel and helped me make this as cool as ever. If you'd like to join the team and support me more, then I have a link down below. You can jump on there, chat to me, see videos early, and much more. And just like the beginning of this video, if you feel like I've made something fun and you want to see more just like it, a subscribe and a like for this video goes a long way. Thank you so much for watching.